Cartel boss saw an orphan. Defend his daughter from bullies what he did, next shocked everyone. The playground at Riverside Elementary in Phoenix, Arizona, was supposed to be a safe place. It wasn't. 12-year-old Nate Johnson knew this better than most. He'd learned it the hard way, through shoves, through laughter that cut deeper than fists, through the daily reminder that being an orphan with second-hand clothes and holes in your sneakers made you a target. But today was different. Today they weren't just coming for him. Your dad probably left because you're ugly. A boy named George shouted, shoving a small girl with dark curls and a pink backpack. She stumbled, her lunchbox scattering across the concrete. Bet that's why nobody wants you. The girl, maybe 7 or 8, burst into tears. Nate's hands clenched into fists. He should walk away. He always walked away. Getting involved meant getting hurt, and he'd been hurt enough for one lifetime. But something about the way she cried, small and helpless and alone, made him move. "Leave her alone," Nate said, stepping between George and the girl. George was bigger, older, meaner. He laughed. "What are you going to do about it, orphan boy?" I said leave her alone. The first punch caught Nate in the stomach. The second split his lip. But he didn't back down. He swung back, wild, desperate, fueled by every injustice he'd ever swallowed in silence. By the time teachers pulled them apart, Nate was bleeding and George was on the ground, crying. But someone else had been watching the whole thing. Across the street, standing beside a black Mercedes with tinted windows, Diego Navarro watched the playground through cold, calculating eyes. He'd been waiting to pick up his daughter, Isabella, the girl with the pink backpack, when the fight broke out. Diego was not a good man. He'd built an empire on fear, on blood, on choices that kept him awake at 3 in the morning. He controlled half the illegal trade flowing through Arizona. Politicians feared him. Rivals disappeared when they crossed him. But watching that skinny kid with the torn jacket take a beating to protect his daughter, something shifted in Diego's chest, something he thought he'd killed years ago. What he did next would change 2 lives, forever. Welcome back, my wonderful friends. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Thank you for support. If you love what we do here, take a moment to hit the subscribe button, like, share, and let's make this video go viral. Where are you watching from and what time is it over there? Welcome to a story about courage, a redemption, and the unlikeliest of heroes. And if you believe that one act of bravery can change everything, stay until the very end. Trust me, you won't see this coming. Nate Johnson had been in the system since he was 6 years old. His mother died of an overdose in a motel bathroom on the outskirts of Tucson. His father was a question mark. A name his mother never spoke. A face Nate had never seen. The state took him, passed him through 3 foster homes in 4 years, each one worse than the last. The current placement was with the Hendersons, a couple in their 50s who took in foster kids for the monthly checks, not the love. They fed him, gave him a bed in a room he shared with 2 other boys, but that was where their obligation ended. Nate had learned not to expect more. He'd learned not to expect anything at all. The school nurse cleaned his split lip with antiseptic that burned. "You need to stop getting into fights, Nate," she said, not unkindly. "This is the 3rd time this month." "I wasn't starting them," Nate muttered. "Doesn't matter who starts them. Matters who finishes them." She taped a butterfly bandage over the cut. "Principal Weber wants to see you." Nate's stomach sank. Another suspension meant another lecture from Mrs. Henderson about how he was costing them trouble. Another night without dinner. Another reminder that he was a burden nobody wanted. But when he reached the principal's office, something unexpected was waiting. Principal Weber sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable. Beside her stood a man Nate had never seen before, tall, mid-40s, wearing an expensive dark suit that looked out of place in the worn-down elementary school. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud, and beside the man stood the little girl from the playground, Isabella. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she'd stopped trembling. "Nate," Principal Weber said carefully, "this is Mr. Navarro, Isabella's father." Nate's pulse quickened. He'd seen enough movies, heard enough whispered conversations between adults to recognize danger when it walked into a room. And this man, this Mr. Navarro, radiated it. Diego Navarro studied the boy with those cold, dark eyes, taking in the split lip, the bruised knuckles, the defiant tilt of the chin that tried to hide fear. "You defended my daughter," Diego said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but it carried weight. Nate shrugged. She was being bullied. It wasn't right. Most kids would have walked away. Yeah, well. Nate looked at the floor. "I know what it feels like. To be picked on. Nobody should have to feel like that." Something flickered across Diego's face, too quick to read, but there nonetheless. Principal Weber cleared her throat. "Mr. Navarro has requested that we not suspend you, Nate. He's explained that you were acting in defense of his daughter. However, I'd like to speak with the boy." Diego interrupted. "Alone." Principal Weber hesitated. "Mr. Navarro, I'm not sure that's—" Diego's gaze shifted to her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, but Principal Weber fell silent immediately. "5 minutes, Diego said. It wasn't a request. Principal Weber nodded and ushered Isabella out of the office, closing the door behind them. Nate was alone with the most dangerous-looking man he'd ever met. Diego circled the desk slowly, studying Nate like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "How old are you?" 12. "And you're in the foster system." It wasn't a question. Somehow this man already knew. Nate's jaw tightened. So you've learned to survive, to protect yourself. But today, you protected someone else. Why? I already told you. I'm not asking what you did. Diego cut him off. I'm asking why you did it. You had nothing to gain, everything to lose. Yet you stepped in anyway. Nate met his gaze, surprised by his own boldness, because somebody had to, and nobody else was going to. Diego was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Nate didn't expect. He smiled, just slightly, like he'd found something valuable he thought was lost forever. My daughter won't stop talking about you, Diego said. She says you're a hero, that you saved her from the bad boys. He paused. Do you know what that means to me? To know that when I couldn't be there, someone stood up for my little girl. Nate didn't know what to say. Diego reached into his jacket. Nate flinched. Instinct? Survival. But Diego only pulled out a business card. Plain white. A phone number. Nothing else. If you ever need anything, Diego said, placing the card on the desk between them, you call that number. Food, clothes, a safe place, anything. You understand? Nate stared at the card. Why would you help me? Because, Diego said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. I know what it's like to be a kid who has nothing, and I know what it's like to wish someone, anyone, had cared. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Nate. The boys who hurt you today, They won't bother you again. Or Isabella. I've made sure of it. How? Nate asked. Diego's smile was cold. Let's just say their fathers and I had a conversation about respect. Then he was gone. Nate stared at the business card for a long time, his mind racing. He didn't know it yet, but that card was a lifeline. And 3 weeks later, he'd have no choice but to use it. Life didn't get easier after that day. George and his friends left Nate alone, which was something, but the damage was done. The Hendersons decided they didn't want a troublemaker in their house anymore. Social services came, apologetic but firm. They were moving him to a new placement, a group home this time. 15 kids, overworked staff, a place where you learned to sleep with one eye open and hide anything you cared about. Nate lasted 2 weeks before things went sideways. One of the older boys, a 17-year-old named Derek, with dead eyes and a record, decided Nate's shoes were his now. When Nate refused to hand them over, Derek didn't argue. He waited until lights out. Then he and 2 others cornered Nate in the bathroom. The beating was quick, professional, the kind that left bruises where adults wouldn't easily see them. When it was over, Nate lay on the cold tile floor, tasting blood, hearing Derek's laughter echo off the walls. "Welcome to the real world, kid." That night, alone in his bunk with ribs that screamed with every breath, Nate pulled out the business card he'd hidden under his mattress. He stared at the number for 20 minutes. Then with shaking hands, he called. The phone rang once, twice. "Yes?" A man's voice, deep, alert despite the late hour. "Mr. Navarro?" Nate's voice cracked. It's Nate, from the school. You said if I ever needed anything. Where are you?" "Sunrise Group Home, on. I know where it is," Diego interrupted. "Are you hurt?" Nate's throat closed. "Yeah. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack your things." "Wait, I can't just leave." "Yes, you can," Diego said, and something in his voice was absolute. 20 minutes, Nate. Be ready." The line went dead. Nate sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. He'd just called the most dangerous man in Phoenix for help, and that man was coming. What happened next would change everything. Diego Navarro arrived in 18 minutes. Nate watched through the group home's front window as the black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Sleek, expensive, completely out of place in this neighborhood where cars had cracked windshields and missing hubcaps. 2 men stepped out first. Big men. The kind who made you think twice about everything. They surveyed the street with practiced eyes before Diego emerged from the back seat. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket. No suit this time. But somehow, he looked even more dangerous. Nate grabbed his backpack. Everything he owned fit inside it, and headed for the stairs. His ribs screamed with each step, but he bit down on the pain. Ms. Rodriguez, the night supervisor, was dozing at the front desk when Diego walked through the door. She jolted awake, eyes widening at the sight of him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving toward the phone. "I'm here for Nate Johnson," Diego said simply. "Sir, you can't just. This is a state facility. We have protocols. You can't remove a child without proper authorization." Diego placed a folder on the desk. Ms. Rodriguez opened it, her expression shifting from defensive to confused to stunned. Inside were documents, official documents, signed by judges, child services administrators, people whose names carried weight, emergency foster placement approval, background checks so that had somehow been expedited overnight, temporary custody granted to Diego Navarro, pending full evaluation. It should have taken months. Diego had made it happen in hours. "How did you?" Ms. Rodriguez whispered. "Is there a problem?" Diego asked, his tone making it clear there better not be. No problem." She looked at Nate, who stood at the bottom of the stairs, backpack clutched to his chest. "Nate, honey, did you know about this?" Nate shook his head, stunned. "Get your things," Diego said to him. Then to Ms. Rodriguez, "I'll need his medical records, school files, and any medication he's currently taking." "He's not on any medication, and the records will need to be requested through." Diego placed an envelope on the desk, thick, full. Ms. Rodriguez stared at it, then at him. "His records," Diego repeated. "Tonight." 10 minutes later, Nate walked out of Sunrise Group home with a man he barely knew, carrying everything he owned in a backpack that weighed less than 10 pounds. He should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in 6 years, he felt something close to hope. The Mercedes smelled like leather, and something expensive Nate couldn't name. He sat in the back beside Diego, painfully aware of how out of place he was. Torn jeans, a too small jacket, shoes with duct tape holding the sole together. Diego handed him a bottle of water without a word. Nate took it, his hands still shaking slightly. "I don't understand. How did you—" "Those papers, the custody thing. Money opens doors," Diego said simply. "And I have a lot of money." "But why? You don't even know me." Diego was quiet for a moment, watching the Phoenix lights blur past the window. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. "When I was 13, I watched my little sister get beaten by my stepfather while I hid in a closet. I was too afraid to help her, too weak." His jaw clenched. "She died 3 months later, and I promised myself I'd never be weak again, never hide again." Nate's breath caught. "You didn't hide when my daughter needed help," Diego continued. "You stood up when you had every reason not to. That kind of courage." He looked at Nate directly. "That's rare. Worth protecting." "So what happens now?" Nate asked quietly. "I stay with you. Temporarily, until we figure out something permanent. But yes." Diego paused. "There are rules, though. You go to school. You stay out of trouble. You respect my home and my daughter. You understand?" Nate nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "And Nate?" Diego's expression was serious. "What I do, my business, is not something you need to know about. Not something you want to know about. You see things, you hear things, you forget them. That's how you stay safe. That's how this works." Nate understood perfectly. He was entering a world where questions could be dangerous, but it was still better than the world he was leaving behind. Diego's house wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Set back from the road behind iron gates and walls topped with cameras, the property sprawled across 3 acres in Paradise Valley, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Phoenix. Inside, everything was clean, expensive, and intimidating. Nate stood in the marble foyer, feeling like he'd stepped into a different universe. "Papa." Isabella's voice echoed through the house as she came running down the curved staircase, in pajamas, her dark curls bouncing. She stopped when she saw Nate, her eyes going wide. "Nate, you're here." "Isabella, it's past your bedtime," Diego said, but there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there moments ago. "But Papa, Nate's here. Is he visiting? Can he stay for breakfast?" She grabbed Nate's hand without hesitation, looking up at him with pure joy. "Did you come to play?" Diego knelt down to her level. Mi amor, Nate is going to be staying with us for a while. He needs a safe place, and we have room. Can you help me make sure he feels welcome? Isabella nodded seriously, then turned to Nate. You can have the room next to mine, and we can play in the garden, and I can show you my books, and— Tomorrow, Diego interrupted gently. Right now, Nate needs to rest, and you need to sleep. A woman appeared from a hallway, 50s, kind eyes, wearing an apron. Mr. Navarro, I've prepared the guest room and— She stopped when she saw Nate, taking in his bruised face and battered appearance. Something soft crossed her expression. Oh, mijo. This is Rosa, Diego said. She manages the house. Rosa, this is Nate. He'll be staying with us. Rosa nodded, already moving into action. Come, let's get you cleaned up and fed. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. She wasn't wrong. 20 minutes later, Nate sat at a Kit Linda island that was bigger than his entire room at the group home, eating chicken soup that tasted like something from a dream. Rosa fussed over him like a grandmother, despite his protests. She cleaned the cuts on his face with gentle hands, applied antiseptic, checked his ribs with professional efficiency. You've taken quite a beating, mijo, she said quietly, but you're safe now. Mr. Navarro doesn't let anyone hurt the sapple under his protection. Why does he even care? Nate asked. I'm nobody. Rosa smiled sadly. That's exactly why he cares, because he remembers being nobody, being invisible, and he's decided that nobody under this roof will ever feel that way again. After she left, Nate was shown to his room, a space bigger than any bedroom he'd ever slept in. A real bed with clean sheets, a desk, a window that overlooked the garden, a bathroom attached that was his alone. He stood in the center of the room, backpack still on his shoulders, unable to process it. This couldn't be real. Nothing this good ever happened to kids like him. A knock on the door. Diego stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll get you enrolled in Isabella's school. Better than where you were. Safer. He paused. And Nate, the boys who hurt you at that group home, they'll be dealt with. What does that mean? Nate asked, though part of him already knew. It means you don't need to worry about them anymore. Diego's smile was cold. Sleep well. But Nate couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, feeling the softness of sheets that didn't smell like industrial detergent and other people's sweat. Listening to the silence of a house that felt more like a fortress than a home, and wondering what price he'd eventually have to pay for all this kindness. The next morning, Nate woke to sunlight streaming through windows that actually had curtains. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then it all came rushing back. The fight, the phone call, Diego. He got dressed in his same worn clothes, the only ones he had, and ventured downstairs, following the smell of breakfast. The Kit Linda was alive with activity. Rosa was cooking. Isabella was chattering away at the table, swinging her legs, and Diego sat reading a newspaper, drinking coffee, looking almost normal. Nate? Isabella beamed when she saw him. Sit next to me. Rosa made pancakes. Nate sat, still feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. Diego lowered his newspaper. After breakfast, we're going shopping. You need clothes, school supplies, everything. I can't let you. Nate started. You're not letting me do anything, Diego said firmly. You're part of this household now. That means you get what you need. No arguments. Rosa placed a plate in front of Nate. Pancakes, bacon, eggs, fresh fruit. More food than he usually ate in a day. For the first time in 6 years, Nate felt something dangerous creeping into his chest. He felt like, maybe, just maybe, he'd found a home. But in the shadows, someone was watching Diego's new interest in the orphan boy, and they were not pleased. Across town, in a warehouse that reeked of cigarettes and desperation, a man named Victor Reyes watched security footage on his phone. Footage of Diego leaving the group home with a kid. Footage of them arriving at the Paradise Valley mansion. Victor had worked for Diego once, until Diego decided Victor was skimming profits and making side deals with competitors. Diego hadn't killed him, just destroyed his reputation, his contacts, his entire operation. Victor had been planning revenge for 2 years, and now, watching Diego care about something, someone, other than his untouchable daughter. Victor smiled. "Find out everything about that kid," he told his lieutenant. "Where he came from, what he means to Diego, everything." "You thinking leverage?" "I'm thinking," Victor said slowly, "that Diego just showed us his weakness. And weak spots, that's where you strike." The storm was building, and Nate Johnson, the orphan who just wanted to survive, was standing right in its path. 3 weeks passed, like a dream Nate was afraid to wake from. He started at Desert Crest Academy, a private school where the kids wore uniforms and the cafeteria served real food on actual plates, where teachers knew his name and nobody shoved him in hallways, where Isabella introduced him as "my friend Nate, who saved me," with such pride that other kids actually wanted to talk to him. Diego bought him clothes, real clothes, jeans that fit, shirts without holes, shoes that didn't have duct tape, a winter jacket that was warm and new and his. Rosa made him breakfast every morning and asked about his homework every night. Isabella dragged him into games of pretend in the garden, where he was always the brave knight, and she was always the princess who didn't need saving, but appreciated the help anyway. It was the closest thing to normal Nate had ever experienced, which is exactly why he knew it couldn't last. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon. Nate was walking home from the bus stop with Isabella. Diego's orders were clear. They walked together, always, when a black SUV pulled up beside them. Not Diego's, different. The window rolled down. A man with a scar running down his neck leaned out, smiling in a way that made Nate's instincts scream. "Nate Johnson?" Nate instinctively moved in front of Isabella. "Who's asking?" "A friend. Someone who wants to talk to you about Diego Navarro." The man's smile widened. "About what kind of man you're really living with." "We're not interested," Nate said, grabbing Isabella's hand. "Come on. Your foster dad?" The man called after them. "He's a murderer, kid. A dealer. The devil in an expensive suit. You think he cares about you? He's using you. And when he's done..." Nate pulled Isabella faster, his heart hammering. He didn't look back, but the man's laughter followed them all the way home. That evening, Diego noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Not hesitated. Diego had told him to forget things he saw and heard. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. "Some guy in a black SUV stopped us," Nate said quietly. Isabella was upstairs, safely out of earshot. "He knew my name, asked about you." Diego's expression went cold. "What did he look like?" Nate described him, the scar, the dead eyes, the smile that promised violence. "Victor," Diego said, almost to himself, his jaw clenched. "That pendejo is still breathing because I allowed it. I see now that was a mistake." "Who is he?" "Someone who wants to hurt me," Diego said, "and he's decided the way to do that is through you and Isabella." He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "You don't go anywhere without security from now on. Not school, not the store, nowhere." "I'm sorry," Nate said, "if I'm putting you in danger." "You're not," Diego interrupted firmly. "Victor was coming for me eventually. You're just an excuse." He placed a hand on Nate's shoulder, the first real physical contact they'd shared. "You did the right thing telling me. That's what family does. We protect each other." Family. The word hit Nate like a physical blow. No one had called him family since his mother died. But Victor wasn't done making moves. 2 days later, Nate was called to the principal's office at Desert Crest Academy. His stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from principal's offices. Inside, he found 2 people he'd never seen before. A man and woman in business suits, carrying briefcases and wearing expressions of professional concern. "Nate," Principal Hayes said carefully, "these are representatives from Child Protective Services. They'd like to ask you some questions." Nate's blood went cold. The woman, Miss Linda, according to her badge, sat down across from him with a practiced smile. "Nate, we've received some concerning reports about your current living situation, about Mr. Navarro." "What kind of reports?" Nate asked, though he already knew. "Reports suggesting that Mr. Navarro may not be a suitable guardian, that his business activities create an unsafe environment for children." She leaned forward. "We just want to make sure you're okay, that you're not being coerced or manipulated." "I'm fine," Nate said quickly. "Better than fine. Mr. Navarro he's been good to me." "Has he ever threatened you? Asked you to do things you were uncomfortable with? Exposed you to violence or illegal activities?" "No, none of that. He's just helped me, given me a safe place." The man, Mr. Porter, pulled out a folder. "Nate, we have documentation here about Diego Navarro's suspected criminal affiliations, cartel connections, money laundering. We can't in good conscience leave a child in that environment." Nate's world tilted. "You're taking me away." His voice cracked. "We're doing an investigation," Ms. Linda said gently. "In the meantime, we think it's best if you're placed in a neutral environment, a temporary foster home while we—" "No." Nate stood abruptly. "No, I'm not going back into the system. You can't make me. Nate, we understand this is difficult, but he saved me." Nate's voice rose. "When nobody else cared, when I was getting beat up every night, when I had nothing, he came. He gave me a home, a real home. And now you want to take that away because of some reports?" His eyes burned. "Who made these reports? Who?" Miss Linda and Mr. Porter exchanged glances. They wouldn't say, but Nate already knew. Victor Reyes was playing a different game now, using the system as a weapon. Diego was at the school within 30 minutes of Nate's frantic phone call. He walked into Principal Hayes' office like a storm, controlled, dangerous, barely contained. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miranda Santos, flanked him. "My client has full legal custody of Nate Johnson," Miranda said before anyone else could speak. "Approved by the state, signed by a judge. You cannot remove him without due process. We have cause for concern." Mr. Porter started. "You have anonymous accusations," Miranda interrupted, "from a source you won't reveal. That's not cause. That's harassment." She placed her own folder on the desk. "Here's documentation of every background check, home inspection, and psychological evaluation Mr. Navarro has passed in the last 3 Weeks. Here's testimony from teachers, neighbors, and medical professionals attesting to Nate's improved well-being. And here, she pulled out another document, is a restraining order against a one Victor Reyes, filed this morning, citing harassment and attempted intimidation of a minor. Miss Linda's expression flickered with surprise. You know exactly who made these reports, Miranda continued coldly. A man with a vendetta against my client. A man using your agency as a weapon to terrorize a child who's finally found stability. If you proceed with this removal, we'll sue CPS for emotional damages, harassment, and failure to act in the child's best interest. The room went silent. Principal Hayes cleared her throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion until a more thorough investigation can be conducted. Mr. Porter and Miss Linda weren't happy, but they packed their briefcases and left. For now. In the car on the way home, Nate sat in silence, processing what had almost happened. Thank you, he finally whispered. Diego glanced at him. You don't thank family for protecting you, Nate. That's what we do. But what if they come back? What if... They won't. Diego's voice was absolute. Because tomorrow, Victor Reyes is going to have bigger problems than you and me. What are you going to do? Diego was quiet for a long moment. What I should have done 2 years ago. End this. Nate wanted to ask what that meant. But part of him already knew, and part of him was terrified of what Diego was capable of when someone threatened his family. That night Nate couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Miss Linda's words over and over. Criminal affiliations, cartel connections, unsafe environment. Was it true? Was Diego really everything they said? Nate had seen glimpses. The way people deferred to Diego, the late-night phone calls, the men who came and went from the house at odd hours, the security that was more military than residential. He wasn't stupid. He knew Diego wasn't a regular businessman. But did that change what Diego had done for him? Did that change the fact that for the first time in his life, Nate felt wanted? A soft knock on his door. Isabella peeked in, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Nate, are you awake? Yeah, what's wrong? She patted across the room and climbed onto his bed without invitation. I heard Papa talking. He sounded worried. Are you leaving? No, Nate said, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. I'm not leaving. Good. Isabella nestled against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because you're my brother now. And brothers don't leave. Nate's throat tightened. Brother. He'd never been anyone's brother before. Yeah, he whispered, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. Brothers don't leave. But outside, in the darkness beyond the mansion walls, Victor Reyes was making final preparations. CPS hadn't worked. The legal system hadn't worked. So now, he'd do things the old-fashioned way, blood for blood. And if an orphan kid and a little girl got caught in the crossfire, that was just collateral damage. The attack came at dawn. Nate woke to the sound of gunfire. The sound of gunfire was something Nate had only heard in movies. In real life, it was sharper, closer, terrifying in a way that made his entire body freeze. Then training, survival instinct, honed through years in the system, kicked in. He rolled out of bed, hit the floor, and crawled toward the door. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. Through the crack under his door, he could see flashing lights, red and blue. Not police lights, muzzle flashes. Isabella, he breathed. Her room was next to his. If someone was shooting at the house, if they breached the walls, Nate threw open his door and ran. The hallway was chaos. Diego's security team, men Nate had seen but never really noticed, moved with military precision, weapons drawn, shouting commands in Spanish. One of them grabbed Nate by the shoulders. "Get back in your room. Lock the door. Isabella, we've got her. Go." But Nate didn't go. He shoved past the guard and burst into Isabella's room. She was huddled under her bed, crying, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw Nate, she reached for him with trembling hands. "Nate, I'm scared." He crawled under the bed with her, pulling her close. "I've got you. I've got you. Just stay quiet, okay? Stay with me." Another burst of gunfire, closer this time, the sound of breaking glass, shouting, then Diego's voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" The shooting stopped. An eerie silence fell over the mansion. Nate held Isabella tighter, both of them barely breathing. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful. The door to Isabella's room opened. Diego stood there, a pistol in his hand, his expression carved from stone. When he saw them under the bed, something in his face softened, just for a second. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Nate shook his head. "We're okay. Stay here. Don't move until I come back." Diego's eyes met Nate's with an intensity that burned. "You protect her. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you protect her, understand?" "Yes, sir." Diego nodded once, then was gone. Nate had never felt more terrified or more determined in his entire life. 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. Isabella cried silently against Nate's chest. He stroked her hair, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "It's okay. Your papa's got this. We're safe. We're safe." Finally, footsteps returned. This time, it was Rosa. Her face was pale, but composed. "Come, niños, quickly." She led them downstairs through a route Nate had never seen before, a back staircase hidden behind a panel in the hallway. The mansion was bigger than he'd realized, more secrets than he'd imagined. They emerged into a garage, where 3 SUVs idled, engines running. Diego stood beside one, speaking rapid Spanish into his phone. When he saw them, he ended the call. "Get in," he said. "We're leaving." "What happened?" Nate asked. "Who was shooting?" "Victor." Diego's jaw was tight. "He brought a team, thought he could breach my home, threaten my family." His expression was carved from ice. He was wrong. Rosa buckled Isabella into the middle SUV. Diego gestured for Nate to get in beside her. "Where are we going?" Nate asked. "Somewhere safe, somewhere he can't touch you." Diego paused, his hand on the door. "Nate, I need to handle this. I need to end this, but that means—" "I understand," Nate interrupted. He did. He understood exactly what Diego meant, what ending this would require. Diego studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're braver than you know, kid." The convoy pulled out of the garage just as police sirens wailed in the distance. The safe house was 2 hours outside Phoenix, hidden in the desert hills near Sedona. A compound, really. Armed guards, reinforced walls, surveillance cameras covering every angle. Nate and Isabella were shown to a room with 2 beds. Rosa stayed with them, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy despite the armed men patrolling outside. "Will Papa be okay?" Isabella asked for the 10th time. "Your Papa is the strongest man I know," Rosa said gently. "He'll be fine." But Nate saw the worry in her eyes. Diego had gone back to Phoenix, back into the lion's den, to end Victor Reyes once and for all. Hours passed like molasses. Isabella finally fell asleep, exhausted from crying. Rosa made soup that no one ate. Nate sat by the window, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in violent oranges and reds. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in the system, kid. At least there, you'd only get beat up. With Diego, you're going to get buried." Nate's blood ran cold. He showed the message to Rosa. Her expression darkened. "Don't respond. Don't engage. Diego will handle this." But the messages kept coming. "He's using you. Don't you see? You're leverage. Bait. That the moment you stop being useful, you're gone. How many people has Diego killed, you think? 10? 20? 50? And you're living under his roof, calling him family? When the feds finally take him down, and they will, where does that leave you? Back in the system, alone, again." Each message was a poisoned dart, hitting exactly where Nate was most vulnerable, because part of him wondered if it was true. At midnight, Diego finally returned. He looked exhausted. There was blood on his shirt, not his own, Nate realized with a chill, but he was alive, whole. "It's done," he said simply. Rosa crossed herself. "Victor? Won't be a problem anymore." Diego's tone left no room for questions. He sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, Nate saw him look mortal, fallible, human. "I'm sorry," Diego said quietly. "I brought this into your lives. I should have—" "Don't." Nate surprised himself by speaking up. "You saved me. You gave me a home. This isn't your fault." Diego looked at him with something like pride. "You're a good kid, Nate. Better than this world deserves." But the relief of survival was short-lived. The next morning, federal agents surrounded the compound. Nate woke to the sound of helicopters, loudspeakers, commands to come out with your hands up. Diego stood at the window, watching with grim acceptance. "They waited until I finished Victor," he said, almost to himself. "Let me clean up their problem. Now they're here to clean me up." "What do we do?" Rosa asked, her voice tight with fear. "You do nothing," Diego said. He looked at Nate and Isabella, both awake now, both terrified. "This was always coming. I knew it. I hoped I'd have more time." There was a knock at the door, firm, authoritative. Diego opened it to find a woman in an FBI jacket. Behind her, a dozen agents with weapons drawn. "Diego Navarro," she said, "you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other charges. You have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights," Diego said calmly. He held out his wrists for the cuffs. "Papa!" Isabella screamed, running toward him. An agent moved to stop her, but Diego's glare froze him in place. "Let her say goodbye," Diego said quietly. The FBI agent, the woman leading the operation, hesitated, then nodded. Isabella crashed into Diego's legs, sobbing. He knelt down, still cuffed, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Mi princesa, listen to me. I have to go away for a while, but Rosa will take care of you, and Nate will protect you, like he always has." "I don't want you to go," Isabella cried. I know, baby, but I'll come back, I promise." He kissed her forehead. "Be brave, like your brother." Then he looked at Nate. "Take care of her," Diego said. "Take care of each other." Nate's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded. The agents led Diego away. He didn't resist, didn't fight, just walked with his head high, even in handcuffs, even surrounded by federal agents who'd been hunting him for years. And Nate stood there, watching the man who'd saved him get taken away in chains. The aftermath was chaos. CPS arrived within hours. The same Miss Linda from before, now with court orders and paperwork and that professional sympathy that meant nothing. We'll need to place both children in temporary foster care while we sort out the legal situation, she said. No, Rosa said firmly. Isabella has family in Mexico, her grandmother. I'll contact her. And Nate? Nate's stomach dropped. Back to the system, back to group homes and temporary placements and people who saw him as a paycheck or a problem. He can come with us, Rosa said suddenly. To Mexico, with Isabella. I'll care for both of them until... That's not possible without legal custody arrangements, Ms. Linda said. Nate is a ward of the state. He needs to be placed in... I'll run, Nate said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. If you try to take me back, I'll run. I've done it before. I'll do it again. His voice was steady, despite the fear coursing through him. Diego gave me a home, a family, and now you want to rip that away because he made mistakes? Because he's not perfect? Nate. Miss Linda started. He's more of a father than anyone in my entire life, Nate said, his voice breaking. And I'm not going to abandon his daughter just because it's convenient for your paperwork. The room fell silent. Miss Linda looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Saw not a case file, but a kid who'd finally found something worth fighting for. Let me make some calls, she said quietly. 2 days later, Nate sat in a lawyer's office downtown. Miranda Santos, Diego's lawyer, explained the situation with brutal honesty. Diego is going to prison, probably for a long time. He's negotiating a plea deal, but even with cooperation, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. She paused. However, he's liquidating assets, setting up trusts. He wants to make sure Isabella and you are provided for. Me? Nate asked, stunned. He's adding you to the trust. Full education coverage, living expenses, everything. Miranda slid papers across the desk. He's also filed paperwork to legally adopt you, if you consent. Nate stared at the documents. Adoption. A man in prison, facing decades behind bars, wanted to adopt him. Why? Nate whispered. Miranda's expression softened. Because he told me, and I quote, that kid stood up for my daughter when he had nothing. He's got more honor than most men I've known. He deserves a real family, even if I can't be there to give it to him. Nate's vision blurred with tears. There's more, Miranda said gently. The courts have agreed to a unique arrangement. Rosa has been approved as your legal guardian, along with Isabella's grandmother in Mexico. You'll split time between the U.S. and Mexico, continue your education, visit Diego when possible. She paused. It's not perfect, but it's something. Nate looked at the adoption papers, at Diego's signature already on the bottom, a convicted criminal, a cartel boss, a man facing life in prison, was also the only person who'd ever chosen him. He picked up the pen and signed. 6 months later, Nate stood outside the Arizona State Prison complex in Florence, his hands shaking slightly as he held the visitor's pass. It was his first time seeing Diego since the arrest. Rosa stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, mijo. I'm ready, Nate said, though he wasn't sure it was true. The truth was he'd been carrying questions for 6 months. Questions that kept him awake at night. Questions that twisted in his gut every time he thought about the man who'd saved him. Was Diego a good man who'd done bad things? Or a bad man who'd done one good thing, and did it even matter? The visitation room was exactly what Nate expected. Cold, institutional, designed to strip away dignity. Prisoners sat at bolted-down tables across from their visitors, separated by nothing but air and the watchful eyes of guards. When Diego was brought in, Nate barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by orange prison scrubs. He'd lost weight. There were new lines around his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. But when he saw Nate, his face transformed. "Mijo," Diego said, his voice rough with emotion. He sat down across from Nate, hands folded on the table. "You came." "Of course I came," Nate said. "You're my—" He paused, the words still strange on his tongue. "You're my dad." Diego's eyes glistened. "How's Isabella?" "Good. Really good. She misses you, draws you pictures every week." Nate pulled out a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing of a family holding hands. "She wanted me to bring you this." Diego took it with trembling hands, staring at it like it was made of gold. "She drew you with us," he said quietly, "in the family." "Yeah." Nate's throat tightened. "She calls me her brother now, every day." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, Nate spoke. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Diego nodded. "Always." "Did you kill people?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Diego didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Yes." Nate had expected it, but hearing it confirmed still hit like a punch to the chest. "How many? Does the number matter?" Diego asked quietly. "I don't know, maybe. Nate struggled for words. "I need to understand. How can someone who does that, who hurts people, who destroys lives, how can that same person be kind, be a father?" Diego leaned back, his expression heavy with the weight of years. "When I was your age, I watched my stepfather beat my mother to death. I was too small to stop him, too weak. After she died, I ended up on the streets of Juarez, alone, starving. And I learned very quickly that the world doesn't care about weak people. It devours them." He looked directly at Nate. "So I became strong. I became feared. I built power so no one could ever hurt me again. And in building that power, I did things, terrible things, that I can never take back. I hurt people. I destroyed families. I became exactly the kind of monster I swore I'd never be." "Then why help me?" Nate asked, his voice breaking. "Why help us?" "Because," Diego said, and for the first time his voice wavered, "I saw you returning that milk for Isabella, taking a beating to protect her, and I saw a chance at redemption. I saw a kid who had nothing, just like me, but who chose kindness anyway, who chose courage. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could protect that, if I could save you from becoming what I became, then maybe all the terrible things I've done might mean something." Tears ran down Nate's face. "But you're in here. For the rest of your life, maybe. How is that redemption?" "Because you're out there," Diego said simply. "You and Isabella, safe, educated, loved. You have a future I made sure of. You'll never have to make the choices I made. You'll never have to hurt people to survive." He smiled sadly. "That's my redemption, Nate. Not freedom, not forgiveness, just knowing that I broke the cycle, that I saved 2 kids from the darkness that swallowed me." Nate understood then. Diego wasn't a good man. He wasn't a hero, but he was a man who'd chosen, in the end, to do something right with the power he'd built doing wrong. And maybe that was enough. "I brought you something," Nate said, pulling out an envelope. "Letters from Isabella, from Rosa, From me. We've been writing them for months, waiting until I could bring them. Diego took the envelope like it was made of glass. Thank you. And I wanted to tell you. Nate took a deep breath. I signed the adoption papers. Officially, you're legally my father now. Diego's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down his face. This man who'd built an empire on violence and fear, crying in a prison visitation room because an orphan kid called him father. I don't deserve that, Diego whispered. Maybe not, Nate said honestly, but I'm giving it to you anyway, because you gave me something nobody else ever did. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to believe I was worth something. He reached across the table, not quite touching. Guards didn't allow contact, but close. You saved me, Dad. And now I'm going to make sure your sacrifice means something. How? Diego asked. By being better than both of us ever were. Nate said, by taking care of Isabella, by finishing school, by becoming someone who uses power to protect people, not hurt them. His voice was steady, certain. You broke the cycle for me. Now I'm going to keep it broken. Diego smiled, a real smile, full of pride and pain and hope. You're already a better man than I ever was, mijo. The visit ended too soon. As guards led Diego away, he looked back one last time. Nate raised his hand in farewell, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a promise, a bond that prison walls couldn't break. Diego had been many things, a criminal, a killer, a monster, but he'd also been a father, and that, Nate decided, was the part that mattered most. Outside the prison, Rosa waited by the car. When Nate emerged, she studied his face. How do you feel? She asked. Nate thought about it. Sad, but okay, I think I'm okay. Good. Rosa opened the car door. Because we have somewhere to be. Where? She smiled mysteriously. You'll see. They drove 2 hours back to Phoenix, to a building Nate had never seen before. A community center in a neighborhood that looked a lot like the ones he'd grown up in. Worn down, forgotten, struggling. But the center was new, freshly painted. A sign above the door read, The Diego Navarro Youth Center, a second chance for every kid. Nate stared. What is this? Diego's last gift, Rosa explained. Before he went to prison, he liquidated everything he couldn't leave to you and Isabella, and he used it to build this, a place for foster kids, orphans, kids who have nothing. She gestured to the building. Free meals, tutoring, counseling, job training, a safe place to just be. Nate's vision blurred. He did this? He did this, Rosa confirmed, and he wanted you to run it someday, when you're ready, to be the person for other kids that he was for you. The weight of it, the responsibility, the hope, the legacy, settled on Nate's shoulders. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel crushed by weight. He felt lifted by purpose. Inside the center, dozens of kids filled the space, playing basketball, doing homework, laughing with volunteers. Kids who looked exactly like Nate had 6 months ago, lost, scared, alone. A little boy, maybe 8, ran up to him. Are you Nate? The one Mr. Diego talks about in his letters? Yeah, Nate said, surprised. You know him? He writes to all of us, the boy said proudly. From prison, tells us stories, tells us we matter, tells us about you and how you were brave. He looked up at Nate with wide, hopeful eyes. Is it true that you defended a girl from bullies even though you were scared? Nate knelt down to the boy's level. Yeah, it's true. I want to be brave like that, the boy whispered. Nate saw himself in this kid, saw every foster home, Every beating, every moment he'd felt invisible. "You already are," Nate said gently. "You're here. You're surviving. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." The boy smiled, a smile that reminded Nate of Isabella, of hope, of second chances. That night, back at the house in Paradise Valley, the house Diego had left to Rosa in trust for Isabella and Nate, Nate sat at the desk in his room and pulled out a piece of paper. He'd been writing letters to Diego every week. This one felt different. "Dear Dad, I visited the center today. I met the kids. I saw what you built with the life you had left. You asked me once how someone who does terrible things can also do good things. I think I finally understand the answer. We're not just one thing. We're not just our worst moments or our best moments. We're the sum of our choices. And you chose, in the end, to build something better than what you destroyed. I'm going to finish school, go to college, study social work or law or something that helps people. And then I'm going to run that center. I'm going to be there for kids the way you were there for me. You said I'm your redemption. But you're mine, too. You taught me that it's never too late to choose differently, to be better, to love someone more than you fear the cost. Isabella drew you another picture today. She says you're the best papa in the world, and that when you come home, we're going to have the biggest party ever. I didn't tell her it might be 20 years. I just told her you love us, and that we'll wait, because that's what family does, love. Nate." Across the city, in a maximum security cell, Diego Navarro lay on his bunk, staring at the crayon drawing taped to his wall. A family holding hands, a father, a daughter, a son. He'd destroyed lives to build his empire, but he'd saved 2 lives before it fell, and in the end, maybe that was enough. If this story is touching your heart, don't just watch. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of people who believe in second chances, in redemption, and in the power of love to change even the darkest lives. Drop A in the comments if you believe people can change. And stay tuned, because this story isn't over yet. 15 years later, Nate Johnson stood at a podium in front of 200 people, his hands resting on the speech he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The auditorium at Arizona State University was packed. Professors, students, community leaders, and kids from the Diego Navarro Youth Center who'd come to watch him receive his master's degree in social work. But there was one seat in the front row that mattered most. Diego Navarro sat there in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple button-down shirt, looking older, grayer, but free. After serving 12 years of his sentence, his cooperation with federal authorities, and his extraordinary work with at-risk youth through prison outreach programs had earned him early release. He'd walked out of prison 3 months ago, and he'd walked straight back into the family that had waited for him. "When I was 12 years old," Nate began, his voice steady and strong, "I had nothing, no family, no home, no reason to believe tomorrow would be better than today." He paused, looking directly at Diego. Then a man saw me defend his daughter from bullies, and instead of walking away, he chose to save me. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. People ask me all the time, how can you call a convicted criminal your father? How can you forgive the things he did? Nate's eyes glistened, and I tell them, I don't forgive the crimes. I can't. Those victims deserved better. Their families deserved better. But I also can't ignore that this same man took a broken kid and gave him a reason to believe in second chances. He held up his diploma. This degree, it exists because Diego Navarro taught me that your past doesn't define your future, that you can be more than your worst moments, that redemption isn't about erasing what you've done. It's about what you choose to do next. Diego wiped tears from his eyes, not bothering to hide them. Today, the Diego Navarro Youth Center has helped over 3,000 kids, Nate continued, kids who were exactly where I was, lost, forgotten, convinced they didn't matter. We've provided education, counseling, job training, and most importantly, we've told them the truth. You are worthy, you are seen, you are loved. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of kids who'd found hope in Diego's legacy. My father made terrible choices. He hurt people, he broke laws, and he spent every day since trying to make amends, in prison, through letters, through funding programs, through using his story as a warning and a promise. Nate's voice broke slightly. He can't undo the past, but he changed the future. My future, and thousands of other futures. The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. After the ceremony, Diego stood awkwardly in the crowd, still adjusting to being around so many people, without guards and walls. Nate made his way through well-wishers until he reached him. They stood face to face, the cartel boss and the orphan, the father and the son. "I'm proud of you, mijo," Diego said, his voice thick with emotion. "More proud than I have words for. I learned from the best," Nate said. Then after a pause, "How does it feel, being out?" Diego looked around at the celebration, at the life happening around him, normal, beautiful, free. "Strange, like I'm visiting someone else's dream." He met Nate's eyes. "But I get to see you, and Isabella, and Rosa. So it feels like heaven, even if I don't deserve it." "Stop saying you don't deserve it," Nate said firmly. "You paid your debt. You served your time. You've spent 15 years making amends. At some point, you have to let yourself be forgiven." Diego smiled sadly. "Maybe someday I will." The celebration moved to the house in Paradise Valley, the same house where Nate had first felt safe, where Isabella had declared him her brother, where family had been redefined. Rosa had prepared a feast. Isabella, now 22, and finishing her degree in elementary education, decorated with the same enthusiasm she'd had as a child. And dozens of kids from the center showed up, treating Nate like the hero he'd never believed he was. As the sun set over Phoenix, Nate found himself on the back patio with Diego and Isabella, watching the sky turn orange and pink. "Do you remember that day at the grocery store?" Diego asked quietly. "When I saw you return that milk?" "With Isabella? Of course." "No," Diego said. "Different store, different day." He glanced at Nate. 6 months before the playground incident, I saw you at a convenience store trying to buy bread with coins you'd collected. You were 23 cents short. The cashier refused to let you take it." Nate's breath caught. "That was you? Watching?" "I paid for it," Diego said, anonymously, and I couldn't stop thinking about you afterward, about how much you looked like I did at that age. Hungry, desperate, invisible. He smiled. "So when I saw you defend Isabella, I already knew who you were. I'd been looking for a reason to step in. You just gave me one I couldn't ignore. You were watching over me even before you saved me." Nate whispered. "I was watching over a kid who reminded me what I used to be." Diego said, "Before I became a monster, and I decided that if I couldn't save my younger self, I could at least save you." Isabella wrapped her arms around both of them. Well, you saved both of us, and now we're here, together, a weird, broken, beautiful family. The best kind, Nate agreed. They sat in silence, three people bound by trauma and choice, by violence and love, by the most unlikely rescue in the most unexpected place. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Nate walked through the Diego Navarro Youth Center one last time before locking up. A teenager, maybe 15, thin, with haunted eyes that reminded Nate of his own reflection years ago, sat alone in the corner, reading. "Hey," Nate said gently. "We're closing up. You need a ride home?" The kid looked up. "I don't really have a home. Foster placement. It's not great." Nate's heart broke and healed simultaneously. He sat down beside the kid. "What's your name?" "George." "George, I'm Nate. And I want to tell you something important." He pulled out his phone, showing a photo. Diego, Isabella, Rosa, and himself at graduation. A family. 15 years ago, I was exactly where you are. No home, no hope. Convinced I'd never be anything. George stared at the photo. What changed? "Someone saw me," Nate said simply. "Someone believed I was worth saving, and he taught me that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do." He looked at George directly. "So here's what I'm choosing. I'm choosing to see you. I'm choosing to believe you're worth saving. And I'm choosing to make sure you have what I had. A chance." George's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because someone did it for me," Nate said, "and now I'm passing it forward. That's how we break cycles, George. One kid at a time, one choice at a time." He handed George a card with his personal number. "You call me anytime, day or night. If you need food, if you need help, if you just need someone to talk to. You're not invisible anymore. You're seen. You're valued, and you're going to make it, I promise." George clutched the card like a lifeline, just like Nate had clutched Diego's card 15 years ago. That night, Nate lay in bed beside his wife, a social worker he'd met in grad school who shared his passion for helping forgotten kids, and thought about the strange, winding road that had led him here. From an orphan returning milk in a convenience store, to a kid defending a little girl on a playground, to a son of a cartel boss who'd chosen redemption over empire, to a man building his own legacy of second chances. The cycle had been broken, and in its place, something beautiful had grown. 25 years after that day on the playground, Nate Johnson stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the 10th Diego Navarro Youth Center, this one in Los Angeles, serving thousands more kids. Beside him stood his own daughter, Elena, age 8, holding the scissors with serious concentration. Diego, now 71, gray-haired and slower but still sharp-eyed, stood on his other side, and Isabella, now a principal at an elementary school, held her own 2 children. "Ready, mija?" Nate asked Elena. She nodded and cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered. Later, Elena tugged on Nate's sleeve. "Papa, Grandpa Diego says you were very brave when you were little, that you saved Aunt Isabella." "I did," Nate said, "but Grandpa Diego saved me first. And you save other kids now," Elena said seriously. "So it's like a circle, a good circle." Nate smiled, his heart full. "Yeah, baby, it's exactly like a good circle." He looked at Diego, who was watching his family with tears in his eyes, this man who'd built an empire on darkness, then spent the rest of his life building something brighter. They'd both been broken. They'd both been saved. And now, together, they were saving others. That night, Nate updated the plaque outside the original youth center. It read, "The Diego Navarro Youth Center, founded by a man who made terrible choices and spent his life making better ones. A reminder that redemption is possible, that second chances matter, that one act of kindness can change everything. In memory of all the kids who were told they didn't matter. You do. You always did. And we'll never stop fighting for you." Below it, a new line had been added, "Run by Nate Johnson, who proved that the rescued can become the rescuers." If this story moved you, don't just watch and leave. Subscribe and become part of our community that believes in the power of second chances. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that remind us that redemption is real, that love conquers darkness, and that every person, no matter how broken, deserves a chance to be seen. Drop a if you believe in the power of one person choosing to care, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their past doesn't define their future. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing. And remember, you matter. You've always mattered. We'll see you in the next story.